Better World Blueprint. Good humans doing good things.
When the state of the world is getting me down, there's one thing that restores my faith. People who are trying to make the world a better place. Their passion, purpose, compassion and kindness inspire me and make me feel hope. And hope to me is like warm sunshine on my face in the sense that anything is possible. May these people give you similar sensations. I'm Siobhan Hunt. Welcome to A Better World Blueprint. I've been doing yoga for many years now, and I've found that its principles have really helped to guide me and help me to lead a more compassionate life. I've had several great teachers who have changed me in many ways, and Hayley Steadman is one of those teachers. She is sunshine personified, at least if sunshine could talk and offer wisdom at the same time as a healthy dose of humour and love. For me, the best teachers are always the ones who take their yoga practice off the mat, which among other things means living in the world with compassion. Through every class she teaches, whether it's philosophy or the practice on the mat, Hayley changes lives. I hope you enjoy this chat with yoga teacher Hayley Steadman. Hello, Hayley, and welcome to A Better World Blueprint.
Thank you, Sheb. It's lovely to be here.
What led you to becoming a yoga teacher? Was there a wake-up moment? You're laughing already. I love it.
I am laughing already. I'm going to laugh all the way through this, Sheb, so sorry about that.
That's why I love your classes, Hayley. You know I'm all up for a good giggle.
No, it's because I've really been taking this question seriously, because it's the first one. And I think for me, it's like what led you to this? My whole life has led me to my work. And so I'm like, how long has Sheb got? Like, does she want my whole life story? Like, how much detail does she want? Like, I don't want to overshare.
All of it. Give me all of it.
Well, I'm going to try and summarize as best as I can. And if I just like go off, just, look at me and I'll try and come back. All right. So I guess for me, there wasn't necessarily one moment. I think that, like, as I look back at my life, it's kind of like the sequence of events. And in my kind of young life, there was a lot of suffering. I lost my dad when I was 11, and I think that's kind of where it kind of all stems from, but maybe it would be a little bit before that as well. And that was in a bit of an accident, and that kind of had like ripple effects on my family and, on myself. And I think that we didn't really process that very well, again, like as individuals and as a unit. And so and that was when I was 11. And so I spent my teenage years, holding a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings and a lot of confusion. And I guess now that would be kind of referred to as trauma. I think because of that, this is all getting a bit deep, a bit quick. So I hope that's all right.
That's what we're all about, that. Dive in.
Dive in. And I think because of that, I spent a lot of my teenage years partying and drinking and doing a lot of drugs. And by the time I was like late teens, I was so disconnected from myself. I had a really, really bad relationship with myself and wasn't living in my body, wasn't living in my mind, wasn't living in my heart at all. And I really didn't like myself. Like, I didn't have a good relationship with myself at all. And it was really strange, because even though I was living this kind of like hedonistic party lifestyle, because I was also working in restaurants back in the UK, I also had this like real seeking within me. And this started when I was, again, like really young, like even just after a few years after my dad died, I started going to religious classes at school and, just like seeking some meaning, wanting to understand what life was really like. Yeah, when I was like 16, 17, I started, again, reading books. And I did just turn to religion because I think that definitely for me and the communities that I was growing up in, that was where you kind of went to search. And so it was a lot of kind of reading about Christianity, but then I came across Buddhism, and then I even started reading some yoga books, but I didn't really know what I was reading. Like, it was just really, really interesting. And I think I went to these random meditation classes too as well, but nothing really stuck. And like, no matter how much I was really interested in these kinds of ideas about, I think I was really drawn to like understanding life and having a meaningful life. I also was like, well, how do I put this together with my party lifestyle? Like, it's just not going to go together. I remember like, this isn't really working for me, like in Buddhism, it was like giving up intoxicants. So I was like, can I get around that one?
Can I be the first Buddhist
that just likes to party?
Got to be a first for everything.
Yeah. No, but I think that I always find that funny because it always reflects back to me. Like, I like to take everything seriously. So because I knew that I couldn't follow all of the rules, I was like, okay, I'll just follow none of them for now. I'm all or nothing. That's what I can definitely guarantee you. So that was kind of happening then. And then a few years later, I ended up getting really, really sick. And so I woke up one morning and I really could not move. I had like sores all over my mouth, and it turned out that I had like a really bad case of glandular fever. So by this time, I think I was about 20, 21. And that, I guess, if you want like a wake up moment, I think that was my wake up moment of like, I actually can't live like this anymore. And I didn't think about it at the time, but sometimes when I'm reflecting back on those years, sometimes I'm like, how am I alive? Like, I just did so many crazy things. Like, I'm not going to mention any of them here. I'm like, I feel like I must have been a cat with 9 lives. Like, I just was like, really running on some luck there. And I think that after that, I spent 2 or 3 weeks in bed, and I think that was really that time to reflect, because I was just forced to stop. I couldn't even work, I couldn't do anything, I just had to rest. And I guess that was like the start of my healing journey that's still going on now. And during that time, my mum and my sister were going to yoga class together once a week, and they invited me to go along. And so I went with them, and I just loved it from the beginning. I just remember kind of lying down in Shavasana, which is just like the last pose in the class, which is everyone's favorite usually.
Yes.
Yes. And I just remember lying down and just feeling, quiet and calm and a little bit of peace and a little bit of lightness. And I couldn't remember ever feeling like that before. And so from then on, like, I don't want to say hooked, right? Because I don't like when we say that we get like hooked on yoga, but I was a little bit hooked. Right? And so, I started going to classes really regularly, and it was never about the physical for me. Like, I never ever saw it as a workout. So I did start then discovering about meditation, and I started learning about yoga philosophy, and it was such a great moment for me because it just felt like everything was coming together. Like, all of that seeking and that searching that I'd had growing up was then like making sense. And I was like, oh, I remember like coming to this text years ago and not understanding why I was there. Yeah. And I think that, I do think yoga is a really healing practice. And for me, it definitely was. And I think that from then, the practice just was kind of like putting me back together piece by piece. Yeah. And so I think at that point, even just regularly moving my body in that way would have just been enough. But I think it was reconnecting me with my body. It was helping me to come back into my body, and I started to realize, like, if I go to yoga, I physically feel better. And, if I didn't sleep well, then I didn't feel better in the yoga practice. So I started sleeping better, and the same with kind of food. And it was really interesting because it suddenly was just having this impact on all of these other things. And so I wanted to take better care of myself so that, I would feel better for my yoga practice. And it was the same like in my mind too. Like, I know if I missed a week of classes, my mind could get a little bit heavy, or I'd get more stressed or more tense. And so, it was like, okay, I've got to keep the regularity of the practice and I've got to keep the discipline of the practice. And it kind of just really snowballed from there. And, I think that, like, not only was I just letting go of all of this heaviness that was in my body and in my mind, just my life got much better. Like, my relationships got better. And I didn't know at the time, but I remember reading, and I always talk to you about her, Pema Chodron. She kind of says that the first part of practice is making friends with yourself. And for me, that was what yoga did. Like, it brought me back to myself, which was so hard, but also, incredibly empowering at the same time. And I just started to build that better relationship with myself through practice.
It's interesting because you're explaining this coming back to yourself and the way yoga helped you make sense of the world, I suppose, ultimately. Yeah. But you are an exceptional teacher. I can say that because I have done your classes. In your class, it feels like this is what you were born to do. Not everyone who practices yoga can teach yoga. There's something extra to those people because a yoga practice can be a very private thing, like you've just explained.
Yeah.
The many different ways it impacted you on a personal level. I'm just wondering what made you want to teach?
I think it was the power in my experience, and that's why I always, and I don't tell a lot of people like, oh, this is my backstory and I was doing all of this. But I think in this setting, it's really important just because I'm not good at, not always good at kind of sharing the personal details. But I do feel like that. Like, I do feel like I was just supposed to do this. And it doesn't make any sense.
Oh, it does to me.
It makes sense. And then it seems so wild at the same time to say that. But I think that because, like, you see so much now, like yoga is life-changing. You need to do yoga. And for me, it's like I say those words and I fully hand on my heart believe them. And I think that's the thing, is that I have this such personal experience with how transformative the practice can be. And, always wished, I found it so young, I was like 20, 21 when I started. And I wish that I had practiced even earlier, and I think that was my passion, was like, I need everyone to know how powerful this really is. Because I think, it's so interesting because in the Hindu text, it says one of the reasons why you would come to yoga is because you're suffering and searching for meaning. And I think in our world today, this is everyone, at least where we are, in this privileged world. And I think working out how to have a meaningful life is so difficult. And I think this is a way where we can really connect back in with ourselves and work out what that is for us.
One thing I will say is people may have idealized versions or in their head, or idealized visions in their head of what being a yoga teacher is. It's probably wearing floaty dresses and wafting along some pathway next to a beach and maybe doing a few sun salutes. But in the traditional yoga practice, teachers often get up at 3 a.m. to practice before they come to teach their students. And most people should hear that and think brutal, because it is a brutal time to wake up.
Brutal.
And when you practice yoga, it's also about turning up on the mat even when you don't want to be there. It's not like it's not necessarily always a beautiful experience, because there is challenge in postures, there's challenge in a practice. Was there challenge in becoming a teacher on that level?
I think so. I really think so. And I think there's I could go in a few directions with that question. So I think it's really interesting what you say, because the way you described it, I'm always saying I'm not a woo-woo yoga teacher. And I don't mean that to offend anyone, because I think that, there's so much diversity in the way to practice yoga and how you want to live yoga. But for me, it's always been really important to just keep it really real and down to earth and authentic. And so I think it's been challenging to do that. I decided that I was going to go to India. I saved up some money. I was going to go travel. And then whilst I was traveling in India, I was going to do my teacher training. And I guess I feel lucky because I decided that so young, because I mentor some, new yoga teachers now, and they've got a corporate job, and then they've got to work out how to teach and then do a corporate job and be a parent. And it's like a lot. And I feel lucky enough to be like, okay, I can give up everything and just throw myself into this. And it's harder, it's harder to do that as the responsibilities grow. But for me, it was very clear, I went to my first teacher training, and then on that teacher training, we had mentors, and I spoke to my mentor and I said, I want to teach the lineage that I was in. And she literally said, okay, go back to the UK and move here and have this person as your mentor. And I just did everything everyone told me to do. And I say it like it was easy, and it wasn't. It was like moving, moving back to the UK, moving to Cambridge, really rearranging my life. I don't know how I made it happen, but I just made it happen. It was like a really interesting time. And then it was even after I'd done that mentoring, it was like, okay, well, now you need to go back to a school. So I was involved with Jiva Mukti. It was like, you need to go to a Jiva Mukti school and get your next training. And I was like, okay, I'll move to Australia. and then I just moved to Australia and made it happen.
Is it challenging on a financial level, though? I mean, you've just mentioned you moved to Australia, to Sydney, one of the most expensive cities in the world. Is that a challenge as part of the process?
It has been a challenge. And I guess that's another reason why I'm grateful I started young, because definitely in those first few years, you can live off not much. And, at that time I was living with a partner. We were living in a tiny place, and that's what you do when you're in your 20s. So it's okay. Yeah. I did have a great mentor in the UK. She taught me a lot about find a studio, work at a studio you really like. But the studio can only pay you so much. You need to have other avenues. So you need to be going into businesses, and you need to do corporates, and you need to do events and workshops and privates. You need to work out how you can make this possible for yourself. I just don't see that anymore. I don't see people teaching that anymore, because I think that, the business of yoga is now different, because I think I was getting this one-on-one mentoring. And my mentor understood that I really wanted to be a yoga teacher, and she was gifting me all this knowledge from her career. But now it's just kind of like, sign up to my course. Here's my course. Actually now here's my other course, the business of yoga. Come to my other course. But unless you have that, it's like an apprenticeship, and you need that when you're trying. Ultimately, you're going to be running your own business. And I never knew this. In my first teacher training, there was no business advice. They didn't say anything about marketing or doing taxes or anything like this. I think that's the thing, is that you're not just going to be a yoga teacher, you're suddenly going to own your own business, and I think that's what people don't realize as well. Yeah. And that's why I was lucky, I had a bit of business understanding from the job that I did before. But yeah, I think for me, I can make it work, but I know that teachers can't, or it's really difficult to make it work. And not to bring up the C word, but I think COVID has also made that more difficult as well, because I think there's less opportunities.
Did you ever stumble?
I think so.
And I don't mean in the posture, because we all know.
We all stumble out of the postures. I think stumbling, as I said, I was really determined. And so for me, it was just keep going, keep going, keep going. I think the moment where I really stumbled was when I stepped away from the method that I was teaching. So I was very, very much involved in the Jiva Mukti method for the first kind of 4 or 5 years of teaching. And that was kind of my heart broke a bit when that happened. And I actually stopped teaching for a couple of months, because I left a studio. I had invested so much in that studio that when I left, I had nothing. I mean, I had a couple of private students, but I didn't have anything. I lost my love for the practice. And I thought, if I don't love my practice anymore, and if I don't have that connection with my practice anymore, how can I teach it? Because for me, it was always really authentic, so it's I couldn't go in and pretend. And it took me about 6 months to kind of return back and remember that I'd had a practice before I joined Jiva Mukti, and tried to kind of just process some of the things that had happened. But I'm actually so glad now that happened, because it was from that I was able to almost totally fall apart and then, restart. And that's what's been nice about the last, 5 years since then is deciding, obviously I think there are great benefits of being a part of a method and things that I 100% miss. But I think it's now teaching in a way that feels really like me, and in that time that's started building life in practice. And I think that this is always has been so meaningful to me that I couldn't necessarily share is yoga not just being like on the mat for 90 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it is. It's like, okay, how can my practice stay with me in every moment and really ripple out into my life? And so I'm glad I kind of had to start over, because I think, not only did it bring the love back, but it made me think about, okay, which direction do I want to go in? And it is so meaningful, when you're able to just really have your work be so much of your heart. It just feels so great. But that was a big stumble for me. I almost didn't make it back.
Has being a yoga teacher changed you? It might be hard to reflect on that because you've been doing it for such a long time now.
I think it's interesting because I see the practice as one thing and then my work as another thing, but the work can't happen if I'm not practicing. And, I think I've already shared a little bit how much the practice has totally transformed me as a person. But I think in terms of the work is that it's just cemented it more for me. And I think I remember at the beginning, because I was still working in hospitality and then I was doing a lot of yoga. And it's really hard it's not impossible, but it's really hard to mesh those two kind of seemingly opposite things together. And this is something that my students say to me, who knows what jobs they have, who knows what they have to do in their life. And they find it really hard to integrate the yogic principles into that, especially if they've been doing something for so long. They can't just suddenly go in and just be like, okay, we're going to run everything really differently now, And I think in terms of changing is that it's just allowed me to not only live this practice in terms of for myself, but it's also my job now. And so it's kind of it's just with me at all times,
I have to say, one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you, because one of my first interviews was with a yoga teacher, with Eileen Hall, who I practice with now.
I saw that one, yeah.
Yeah, and I came back to wanting to talk to you about it because the podcast is about people who make the world a better place. And I feel like you have talked a lot about how great yoga is, but for me, in the way you teach, there's an essential seed to what you do that feels to me like it is changing the world. It's making the world a better place. And I'm wondering if you have any reflections on that in terms of what you're teaching, why you're teaching, and the impact that might have on individuals and maybe even the collective.
Yeah, and I do really think that. And I just taught a retreat 2 weeks ago. I write on for retreats. I write out all my talks just so I really know what I'm saying.
So don't get distracted.
I just veer off and say something strange. And we were exploring that weekend the Buddhist heart teachings, and so the main focus of the weekend was it was inspired by a teaching from Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Zen teacher, and he said something, I'm going to get all of the words wrong, so no, don't quote me on this, but it was like, the best thing that we can do is live in this world that is so full of pain and injustice and not let it hide our light. And I think that's the thing, is that I do think that the practice on multiple layers, so like physical, mental, emotional, it changes us. And I think we become more connected with ourselves first, and then we connect better with others around us. And through the practice, because of that change, and sometimes I worry that this sounds like an easy way out, but I don't think it is. But I think by working on ourselves, we do change the world. I really, really do believe this, because I think that a lot of us that care about having a meaningful life, right? I guess, and I always use this word conscious living, right? We care about the world, we care about what we're doing, I think sometimes it can be like, what can I do about all of the things that I'm seeing, you know? Like, how can I actually make an impact about what's happening here in the world or here in the world, or how can I help that person that I don't even know? And there are amazing things that we can do in terms of like activism and speaking about that and bringing awareness. But something that I'm so passionate about, which is what I think we learn through yoga, is like, if I work on myself, like if I work on keeping my heart open and, you know, not being defined by my past and not staying hard and tough and defensive, and, you know, if I work on softening and growing and loving, that is going to impact the close people around me. That is going to then impact my communities. And if I can influence someone else to do that too, not influence, but like encourage or inspire is probably a better word. Yeah, inspire. Then that's how we start a change. Like, that's how we create this chain reaction where we're actually all changing and we're caring about each other more. And that's what the world needs, you know, it needs these little communities. And again, this teaching, like, you know, don't underestimate the power of a small group doing great things or something like this, because, you know, this is where the work really lies is, you know, yes, we need to protest and yes, we need to stand up, but actually we have to check in with ourselves and make sure that we're living all of these principles first, because that's what's going to make an impact.
As you've said, yoga transformed your life, and I'm wondering whether or not you've been able to witness that in any of your students, anyone that stayed with you for a while.
Yeah, I think so. And something that I love is when someone does something they didn't think that they could do, right? And this is why I think asana is so the physical practice is so powerful, because it doesn't even have to be a handstand. Okay, so maybe it's a handstand, but like maybe it's touching your toes. Do you know what I mean? Or I don't know, like, I'm just surprised that people stay with yoga, okay? Because it's really challenging. Like, it's really challenging and it's really confronting. And I think you build so many qualities by just practicing. So it's like what you've mentioned about, you do get up at 3, whatever time it is, you know, it doesn't matter what time it is, but getting there every day in some way, like, you build so much determination. You start believing in yourself. And I think for me, this was a quality that is so powerful. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I can touch my toes, or I can lift my arm up higher than I thought that I could. And then suddenly we're not stuck anymore as human beings. And I think that's the thing. We get really like, I'm like this, I'm always going to be like this. And then you start to just realize actually you can do anything that you put your mind to and practice, you know? So this is what I love. And this is one of the reasons, I mean, I'm very passionate about strength building for the physical benefits, especially for women, because I don't think it's talked about enough. But actually, I just think it's like we need to comfortably challenge ourselves. When we do feel stronger in our body, we then just feel stronger in the mind. And so I think that I do get to see people realize this almost on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you don't always, you know, yes, people talk to you like, oh, Hayley, I did a headstand and I like, can't believe I did that. I think beyond that, people don't necessarily share things until you're leaving. You know, I know that whenever I've left a job or left a studio, left a country, I've got all of these notes being like, I can't tell you how much I'm sleeping better, or, you know, I'm not as anxious anymore. And these are all the things that, like, I mean, I love when people do headstands, like there's a big celebration. But I think this is what's so important, is that people then see the benefits in their life. And it was so beautiful because after the retreat, a student of mine messaged me and just said, like, thank you so much. I went home and I told my 11-year-old daughter about the heart principles. And then I heard her telling her dad about it at night. And I was like, I was so emotional. Because I think this is the thing, is that whether it's yogic teachings or Buddhist teachings or Hindu teachings, it's always made sense to me. Like, and I think a lot of it is very common sense, being a good person, trying not to harm. And I think that, like, just by sharing that knowledge and then having people then go out and have conversations about that, this is what's really important.
It's the ripple effect.
It's the ripple effect. Yeah.
Well, I Love what you do, Hayley. I'm very grateful you've followed this path for myself on a personal level, but also for the world. So thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you, Cher. Thanks for inviting me here today as well. Sorry if I did ramble. I think I did. I just get excited about talking about yoga.
Hayley Steadman, yoga teacher. You can find Hayley online at Life in Practice or at Union Street Yoga in Sydney. I'll put links in the episode notes. I'm Siobhan Hunt. See you next time on A Better World Blueprint.